characteristics, this is what you would see in your classroom. If you haven't taught the class before, these are some of the things that you'd actually see of the most able students. And I've certainly taught some most able students, and a few of them have actually been on the spectrum. And that is something which can be misunderstood by not just an inexperienced teacher, but a lot of teachers as them being perhaps badly behaved, or being a bit cheeky, or being a bit stubborn. And sometimes they are quite stubborn because they've got this there's no grey areas, it's black and white, and one size fits all, and they want that method, and they don't want to change. And think of some of the topics, particularly proof, then you have to have that flexibility, or some of the problem solving, and sometimes they do find it difficult to kind of change things, because they have this fixed way of doing it, and they don't want to change that way. And it's not them being flippant about it or a bit awkward, it's the way they are kind of tuned up and wired up to behave in this way. And so you have to use a lot of tact. Again, this is a gifted, they begin to underachieve if they do get kind of bored, and they can finish the work very quickly. I remember having a girl once in one of my classes many years ago. Her name was Maria, I won't say her surname, and she was quite a very, very naughty girl, very cheeky, but she was clever. And I can remember once doing the quadratic, and I was doing an example on the board, and this is some years ago, so I was using the old pen, the white, not much PowerPoint then, long time ago, and I made a mistake on it. I was rushing, and she put her hand up and she said to me, that won't factorize. And I said, why not? She said, well, the discriminant's negative. And I said, oops. And I kind of, all the rest of the class going, what? So she obviously was well ahead of the game, but she was quite difficult to challenge in that way. So this disruptive behavior in some lessons, but if they're challenged, that often that can be channeled in a positive way. And the dislike of routine work is quite an important one. So sometimes there was a girl in one of my classes a couple of years ago, I won't say the name because she's still at the school at Gumley, and she ended up in set 2, but really I knew she should have been in top set, because her predicted grade was an 8, and she shouldn't have been in set 2. This is in year 10, I think it was, and in year 9 she went down from set 1 to set 2. So in year 10 I picked her up in set 2, and I had to keep challenging her, and you could see she was far above the rest of the class, but she got bored with the teacher she had the previous year, and just underachieved and did very badly in tests. And so that was part of the problem with her. This last point, they're hostile to authority, unable to articulate this. So I'm sure there's some people like that in your class, but they're often often the naughtiest kid in the class is the brightest. That's what I used to say when I was doing teacher training. Identification in terms of just the baseline data. Obviously, someone in the school may have all the actual data for your most able students. The interesting one here is obviously we're looking at the 120 plus for the new Key Stage 2. I think the 11s are still on the old level, so you're talking about them coming in on a 6. We had a very, very bright girl who came in, and she did GCSE year early, but can you do that anymore? First result counts. Okay, if that result is a 9, then it can count as a 9, but then what do you do in year 11? And then suddenly you're doing other qualifications. If you do the A level over 3 years, that can count against them when they apply for university, because they haven't done it in the right time frame. So in a sense, extending students by getting them to do things early is not really order of the day anymore. It's kind of gone out of fashion. And that bottom point there, 1 to 3 years ahead of their peers, then you're containing them within. So there's other qualifications. There's you've got your further maths qualifications that are offered. So that could be an option as an additional. Some stats, GCSE stats is another option. But again, you can see just from the baseline data that these students, as they walk into school, are well above what they should be for the average student coming in, even within a top set. Planning for them, well, again, I'm not going to read all of these. I think we'd agree with most of them, but again, it's one of these things that you need to have time to do them. So what I'm going to do for the second half of this presentation is show you some of the resources I've pulled together to save you that time. Not in terms of strategy, I think the strategy still has to be thought out, but in terms of just having some extra material up your sleeve, which is not more of the same, but some extension material when they finish the work, that I think you'll find useful. Certainly, the people that I've shared that folder with when I've visited other schools doing support visits have appreciated that folder, and they fed back to me that there's some quite useful stuff there. And in a sense, sometimes you can extend it to more than just the most able, but with the top set. So I'm not saying all of this is exclusively for the most able, but I'd say a lot of it is, because if you've got some weak students within a top set, they may see some of the resources that I'm going to show you, or find them quite difficult, quite challenging. This is kind of the no list, and I think we'd all agree with this. And this is some of the things I certainly saw when I was observing lessons and doing performance management, when someone had a top set and they didn't quite get a handle on how to stimulate the brightest students in their class. I had a top set a couple of years ago, and I would say 10 of them were in this category. They were a very, very bright class, and I had to give a lot of extension work to them. And then how do you do it? Do you put them in a group, a very kind of clever group, or do you split them amongst the others to help the others along? Again, I'm not saying there's a right or a wrong way to do it, but there's certainly things that you need to think about in terms of planning for this. But these are the things to kind of avoid, and I think the bottom statement is probably the most important one there, and more challenge rather than more work. Again, I'm not going to read through them all. It's not an exhaustive list. There's quite a lot there. But a lot of these things are ideas that you could use or think about. And I say they might work with one group of students or one class, but maybe not with another. I used to use the most able to provide the plenary. That was quite a nice idea that I used to do quite a lot. There's a couple that aren't on these slides, which I jotted down just pre-course. There is a situation where you could actually use them to mentor the weaker students or lower school students if you have a maths club. Kind of make them champions, maths champions or something like that. So that's one thing you could do. Let's go on to another set here. Again, there's lots here. Again, providing dictionaries. Again, this is a fairly generic list, but I think a lot of it could still apply to mathematics, especially now when you think of the kind of problem-solving questions and the unscaffolded questions. So there's quite a lot there that, again, I'm not going to read through the whole list there, but they're there for you. And sometimes it's just nice to have them as a constant reminder, really, because it's very easy to kind of just get into the routine, mundane things and kind of forget that these students are there. And sometimes you kind of think, let's just mix it up a bit and try something a little bit different. So they're all there. These are other strategies which are a little bit more kind of teacher-led, I suppose, in terms of the planning. Withholding judgment, I like. Playing devil's advocate, that's a really, really good way of doing it. To kind of draw it out of them and use them to kind of lead that discussion. Not to say to do the thinking for the whole class, but in a sense they can be the lead on that, and they can start filling the gaps rather than you saying it. Get them to say it, and they often that's good. I've got again some other ideas which I'll show you later on through the resources. Thinking time is very important as well. So there they are. There's, again, quite a few of them there. Encouraging questioning, I think, is very important as well.